Welcome to the Feisworld podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Feisworld podcast, episode number 14. Yesterday was a really big day for me. Feisworld podcast hit a 1,000 download milestone. I decided to post a message on Facebook thanking all my guests and the people who inspired and encouraged me to pursue this project in the first place. I also welcomed the first snow day in Boston in 2015. Anyway, it is with great pleasure for me to introduce my guest to you today. His name is Ralph Peterson Jr. Ralph is a renowned American jazz musician and a full-time professor at the Berklee School of Music. I met Ralph at our Taekwondo school in 2005. Both of us still practice regularly at O'Malley Taekwondo Center in Peabody, Massachusetts. Ralph often volunteers his time to teach drumming to children during summer and winter camps at the Taekwondo school. All the kids simply love him so much. I remember seeing their little faces pressed up against the school's window waiting for Ralph to arrive with his truck full of drum sets and equipment. Ralph believes that it is his responsibility to pass his knowledge to the next generation. Passing down his knowledge is the way for him to preserve the traditions that he loves. Ralph says, in order to keep a gift, you have to be willing to give it away. Before Ralph's appointment at Berklee, he has taught at the Juilliard School, Princeton University, Long Island University, and the Manhattan School of Music. In this two-part interview with Ralph, we cover topics from his experience performing with Brian Lynch at the Sochi Olympics to his point of view on Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule as evidence of extraordinary achievement, particularly in music, to the most common questions that students have asked Ralph and the most uncommon questions that haven't been asked enough. Ralph not only speaks to the teaching but also the learning of music. In order to study other musicians, Ralph says, you have to think farther than one generation to really get inside their brains and understand where they're coming from. Speaking from experience, Ralph has apprenticed under some of the greatest jazz musicians of our time, including Art Blakey, Betty Carter, Elvin Jones, and Walter Davis. Some of my favorite topics with Ralph include that today students are simultaneously equipped with the most resources, but also the biggest liabilities. Ralph speaks to a time where cassette tapes were considered advanced technology. So admittedly, pursuing a career in music is almost never easy. In search of a shared voice among musicians for their inspirations and also struggles, in part 2 of our conversation, Ralph opened up about how he freed himself from an addiction to crack cocaine. Ralph has been drug-free for over 19 years. There are many takeaways from musicians and non-musicians in this interview, in my opinion. Ralph's belief as a music teacher and student is that you have to identify your gift, your bliss, and start to build a career on top of them. As time changes, you have to adapt and learn how to keep your knowledge and skills current. Ralph was able to redefine his brand and what success means to him as he continues to grow and learn from this experience. Without further ado, please welcome Ralph Peterson Jr. Oh man, thanks for joining.
Times have changed.
Yeah. I think somehow all this is connected as you're talking about the past versus the present. You know, I always contemplated, how has that impacted music? And, growing up, I saw your bio that you started playing and performing at the age of 3.
Well, yeah, I started playing drums when I was 3 years old. Mm-hmm. And There's a great picture I want to show you while we talk about it. My father was a drummer, and my one of my uncles was drummer, and my grandfather played cymbals in the church. So that's like 3 generations of drummers in my family, and I'll show you the cymbals. See those cymbals over there on the ledge?
Yeah.
Those cymbals belong to my grandfather.
Whoa.
And those, so they're well over 100 years old, and he played those in the church. Just cymbals, not drum set, not just cymbals. And so it has been a part of my kind of DNA structure to be around or playing or near the drums in one way, shape, or form. They've always been in my house, and they've always been downstairs. So for me to have this kind of house now as an adult with drums in the basement or in the lower level is almost, natural. I wouldn't feel right if they were upstairs somewhere in one of the bedrooms up there. But I'll hunt around and I'll show you this picture. You'll know when I find it. But come from a long line of drummers, and from a region of New Jersey that produce great drummers as well. Southern New Jersey, Atlantic City area. I'm from Pleasantville, New Jersey, which is 5 to 7 miles west of Atlantic City.
That's interesting. It's part of this regional, and that makes sense, right?
A lot of great drummers. Harvey Mason, who played on Herbie Hancock's famous Chameleon record. Peter Erskine, who played with Weather Report. We all come from a kind of Ventnor, Atlantic City, Pleasantville is like a 10-mile triangle of each other. Those guys they're a little bit my senior, but we come from the same place, no doubt. No doubt, yeah.
I think your career has taken you to many very interesting places. And do you mind reminding me? It was a very recent event. I think it was at the Olympics.
Yes, I was fortunate enough to travel to and perform at Sochi Olympics with great trumpeter Brian Lynch as a part of a cultural exchange between his instrument company. Here's a picture from that. Here's some pictures from that, actually. That's on a sound check, and there's me in a Russian hat, right? And the audience, and this was in a park at a bear, and this was the view outside of my window of my hotel room, and it was right on the Black Sea. It was really great. Music does that. It has the ability to take you all over the world. That's where it all began, though.
Oh,
that's where it all began.
I need a picture of that.
You want that? Okay, I'll send it to you.
Baby Ralph.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. It's funny, as I was driving to your house today, I realized I still haven't been to this area. Now I've lived in Massachusetts for nearly
You've never been to the South Shore?
South Shore, yes, but particularly Weymouth.
Weymouth, yeah. Yeah, it's nice over here.
Very nice. I like it, and it's close to Braintree and Quincy.
Yeah.
I've been to those places multiple times.
But you never came over to Weymouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have the docks over here. It's nice, and it's a pit bull friendly municipality, which was important for us because Bohanna is the second pit bull that we've had since. My wife and I have been together. We had to put down our 14-year-old pit, Kira, in July of this year. So that was tough. But it has great parks and friendly people, and it's right next to Route 3, which gets me on the 93, or I can take the train. The red line's
Berkeley.
not too far. I can get right into Boston or to the airport fairly easily. So that's always a big factor for me. Yeah. I got to be within an hour of a major airport, or it becomes not cost effective for me because if it costs me $200 to get to the airport. then the job really has to be paying a lot of money for it to be worth my while. So.
It's interesting. I was gonna say that as a musician, at your caliber versus as a podcaster at my level. Surprisingly, even podcasting.
Well, I'm not sure what that means, but I mean level. I look at levels linearly, and so we all are kind of on a similar journey, on the same journey, whether it's with our careers or with our training in martial arts. Some of us may be further down the line, but we're all on the same line.
I like that.
And it's more a question of experience than it is a person being better than another person. I tell my students all the time, when I show them something new and they stumble with it, I say, look, don't get frustrated. This is not beyond your ability. It's difficult for you because it's just beyond your experience. So it's not that you're incapable, you just have to experience it more, which is another way of telling them, go practice. Because practice is how you experience, the thing that's difficult, the thing that challenges you. So.
Speaking of practice, have you read the book by, I think it's called The Outlier by Malcolm Gladwell? One chapter that's really known is called the 10,000 Hours, specifically towards musicians. Well, what's your take on that, about 10,000 hours of
I have not read that book, and I probably, like many musicians with the gift of music, love playing music and working on music so much that we're not. I couldn't tell you how long 10,000 hours feels like, because music is the one thing that I lose time and space doing. My sense of time goes away, my sense of pain goes away. I can be injured. I had to play a show. I'm coming off of a shoulder pull, which basically I got from lifting luggage on the train while on the road. But I had to play a show, and I took a couple days off of training at the dojang because I wanted to rest the shoulder. And in my mind, the whole show I'm thinking, boy, everybody's going to be really disappointed in me because I can't be playing well, because I'm worried about... And that was right up until the time the music started.
Yeah.
And as soon as the music stopped, I began worrying about it again. But while the music was going, there's absolutely no pain, And so I think Deepak Chopra said, once you discover the thing that you lose time and space doing, that's a part of your bliss, and that when you find your bliss, you find your purpose, And so for me, playing music, teaching music, doing martial arts, teaching martial arts, they're my bliss, my personal bliss. Not, family, the time I spend with my wife and family goes without saying. Family is important. My father passed away in June, and so I'm really getting a new sense of experience of what it's like to be, the man in my arm of the family tree, and how important it is with that. And learning how to live without my father as a reference point all the time. I didn't realize how many things I used to bounce off of him until he was gone. Sometimes insignificant stuff, like I watched the Manny Pacquiao fight this morning on replay on HBO, and that was a talk we would always have because my father was a champion amateur boxer, so we would always talk about the fight game, together. So, I feel fortunate in life to have found these things and been able to sustain myself doing these things, because people go through whole lifetimes
without that,
without finding that, you know. And so I'm really blessed.
I think music is your superpower. I've seen it in many multiple forms, right? This is the question I was desperate to ask, and as you've seen, I've scribbled on my paper, but sometimes we quickly go to different tracks and more interesting discoveries. And one of the questions I wrote down about an hour ago before I started driving was, is it true, as a non-musician myself, I mean, I'll tell you about my musical background, perhaps you'll be impressed, about 2%, but you know, as a non-musician, we question, what is it like to think, to sleep, to dream like a musician, and how does your world and your experience change around it? How does it change your senses? You know, is it your sixth or seventh sense? You know?
Well, you know, I kind of think that if you remove the specific language and peculiarities of music, I could ask you the same question about whatever it is that you do. Yeah. What you do for a living, you know, which is what?
Project manager is what I do full time, but deep down I consider myself an artist.
Right, and so as an artist, you're an artist on multiple levels. Yeah, you're a martial artist, you're a language artist. You teach language arts. You know, so music is just the particular dialect. That the Creator endowed me with the ability to understand and develop. You know, I don't want to get into a religious discussion on a Sunday afternoon, but some of this stuff, you called it, you said music is my superpower. That's another way of saying it, that it is a gift beyond my doing. You know, yes, I practice, you know, probably not as much as I should anymore. You know,
but it's an enjoyment.
It's an enjoyment. When I'm teaching all the time, it's like practicing.
Yeah.
But it never takes the place of practicing. So, you know, the big gaps that we get off at Berkeley, I spend a lot of that time working on stuff, working on my piano skills, working on my writing, practicing trumpet, you know, because I play trumpet too as well as drums. So I don't know that it feels any different from you being in your bliss or the actor being in theirs or the guy who can frame a house. Because to me, like one of my son-in-laws is a contractor. And the way this kid shoots up ladders and climbs across spaces, not even roofs, but spaces where roofs are going to go, right? I mean, to me, that's a superpower.
It is.
And I find it as fascinating as anybody who might watch me play drums, who have never seen that, might have the same reaction. You know, Christopher is an amazing builder of stuff. You know, and I broke my wrist flying a kite. So, you know, power tools are supposed to be kept far away from people like me.
No, this is so fascinating, and I feel like your perception to the world, not just that I started learning today, but I've noticed since our friendship began years and years ago as Taekwondo practitioners. And it's so interesting. I kept recalling this moment when you and I had to practice a form together. I think the form at the time was new to both of us, so we kept falling out of sync. And then I realized, and I found out you're a drummer. Right. I was thinking, I should probably follow your tempo more so than my own.
Well, you know, you learn as you continue training to bring whatever asset you have to the training. If your asset is based in memorization, or it's based in analyzation, or whether it's based in tempo or timing, you know, I'm working on it. I'm still working on it, but I've always been, since I've been training again, one of the largest, if not the biggest guys training. So I've always struggled with trying to move with people who are smaller than me. And not because in my mind, I always feel like I'm moving in slow motion. Okay? Because, you're all small and fit and, size nothing. And, my belt could probably wrap around you 4 times before it could make a knot. But what I had to learn was that the answer wasn't to speed up, but to actually slow down.
Interesting.
And to find the unique gift in being a martial artist of my age and my physical type. And that advantage is not speed, it's power. And so I started working on learning how to generate a lot of power in not knockdown power, but discernible, visible, audible power in the art of doing forms, which is, my fighting days are over. I got a metal plate and 8 screws in my right ankle. I got 4 screws and 2 rods and a rebuilt disc in my back. Spinal fusion. My fighting days are over. But as a martial artist, and as a kind of student of history and all things traditional, which kind of jazz musicians are at heart, it's no wonder why my focus is on forms and the way forms are executed. So we've come a long way together in that realm. So it's great that we can do this now and talk.
Yeah, we haven't had this opportunity to sit down, and I think one of the moments I think it's a treasure for me to reflect upon is the people I've interviewed. I typically have known them for years and years. We've never had this moment to sit down for 45 minutes, for an hour. And, one of I have a list of questions to go through. So I've always been fascinated by jazz music for 2 reasons. So in my previous episode, I had mentioned that my mom's side of the family and my dad's side combined, we have almost divided in the middle. Half of them are musicians, half of them are artists. You probably didn't know this.
I didn't know that, right? So it's great getting information about you, too. Yeah.
Thank you. So my parents probably, for one reason or the other, I think just to be there trying to be rebels, and plus I didn't have a strong interest in, say, the piano, which every child plays growing up in China. My parents wanted the opposite for me, so I didn't end up doing that. What I did find myself is choosing to study saxophone when I was in a private high school up in Freiburg, Maine.
Okay.
And I was asked to by my music teacher to be able to choose an instrument. So I screamed out alto saxophone because the word in my mind that appeared was very sexy. Something about saxophone was just very romantic, very sexy, and very inaccessible. Not accessible at all in China, right? So I started playing, and fast forward, and I think I did okay in concert band. I loved practicing. I loved performing with my peers. But there's one, I remember there was a jazz band, and Freiburg Academy is actually very famous, very known for that. And we actually competed at Berkeley, and they won.
Okay, cool.
Not to go too deep into that.
Do you still have your saxophone?
I do. I think.
This is the question.
Yeah,
it's never too late.
I like that, and I remember feeling very jealous about the jazz band we had, and it was the brightest of the people from the concert band. The concert band is say like 40-50 people, whereas the jazz band was 6 to 8 to no more than 10 people.
The jazz groups, because they're smaller, are naturally more competitive, and so they're
way more.
Only they're perceived as being at a higher level, but maybe they are, maybe they're just perceived that way. I think that the difficulty of learning the vocabulary and language of jazz music in order to move it forward, I think it's the most difficult music to play.
I agree. If I may comment on that real quick, while studying you through articles, bios, and I almost hit a wall. I was like, let me not even try to say all the parts and the elements. And
I mean, we could do a podcast. We could do a podcast together analyzing one piece of music, and it could go in 6 parts because, I hear music that way. People who don't know painting art look at the pretty colors.
That's it.
They don't see the shading and the dynamic and the contrast and the negative space and the stuff that people with a learned eye can see. And so I studied at I went to Pleasantville High School in Pleasantville, New Jersey, and I studied music with a couple of band directors that were important to mention for both positive and negative reasons. Rob Reiner, Jack Melton, Bill Woods, but the standout was my choir director, Dr. Ola H. Gathers, and because she, number one, was tasked with the director of all arts programs at the high school. But she also took over probably the most accomplished element of our high school music programs, which was our choir. And so I sang in the choir under Dr. Gathers, but I also learned my first music theory lessons were with her. And those music theory lessons, allowed me to basically test out of a lot of the collegiate prerequisites. And so I went to Rutgers University, class of 84, right? I graduated high school in 80. I graduated from Rutgers in 84. And at Rutgers, I studied with another, studying jazz in the 80s was an incredibly unique time. I think the only time that's equaled that period is the period we're in now.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because like the period that I grew up in college, the period now has institutions are filled with doers as well as people who both do and teach. From Branford Marcellus to former students of mine like Sean Jones, who's now the chair of the brass department at Berkeley. Terry Lynn Carrington, just won her 2nd Grammy Award. She was hired at Berkeley 2 years after me. The economics of being a jazz musician now compels us.
I like that.
Because the reality is when you're 20-something and you got no kids and you can live in an apartment the size of the bathroom you were in earlier and live on ramen noodles and brown rice because, you can. Right? You can do that. But then you fall in love and then maybe a child comes your way and you have to start looking at life differently. And, ultimately, by the time you reach your mid-30s, if you've been lucky and you've played a lot of places like I have, you begin to look for more out of life than just the same. And don't get me wrong, the people who do that year in and year out, more power to them. But, after a while I began to feel like I was on a hamster wheel, and that feeling turned self-destructive for me. And this is maybe a part of the podcast that you didn't think I was going to talk about.
No, I
But, I struggled with addiction for a while. I was a cocaine addict. I was a crack addict, And it wasn't because of one particular thing or another. The most important thing was that once I was in, I couldn't get out under my own power, right? So I got some help, and I continue to work on that. And now I'm, coming up on 19 years drinking drug-free, and I help a lot of people find the path and stay on the path, and that helps keep me on the path. But having said all of that, that experience also clarified my priorities and what was important. I have a 25-year-old daughter who's the principal flautist with the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. Wow. I'm incredibly proud of her. She's got a great career. She's got a great profession. And she, our relationship is not atypical of that. I remember when I was 24, 25 years old, I didn't have a lot to say to my parents at that point. But that is what it is. But as I got older, I also realized that a lot of the people who I had been fortunate enough in college and on the road early in my career, that I was fortunate enough to learn directly from them, were leaving this earthly plane. They were dying. And with their deaths, there was either the void or the responsibility, the recognition that I was responsible for trying to fill that void for the generations behind me who want to learn how to play music and feel the superpower. You know what I mean? And so teaching, when I started to look at becoming in earnest, being a college professor, what I realized is that I had always wanted to teach. But, and this is an interesting societal topic, my parents being firmly entrenched in the black middle class, my father was a 35-year veteran of the police force and 4-term mayor of the city I grew up in. My mother basically programmed mainframes for the FAA, for air traffic control.
Wow, I have no idea.
So, these are two, really heavyweight people, and people whose careers were always on the rise, even until they retired. And I remember I had a physics teacher that talked about the 3 levels of society, and he talked about doctors and lawyers and politicians being on the highest, and then you had your policemen and teachers and civil servants, postmen, and then on the lowest end you had your musicians your artists. And I remember being really disturbed by that. I remember being so disturbed by it that I went to Dr. Gathers and told her. And from that point in class, she told me, you make A's in this class, and I'll get you out of that class anytime you need to. So all I had to do was be good at the work. And when I was tired of hearing him talk that kind of shit, I could go and practice or go and have a jam session.
I think, sorry to...
That's all right. That's right.
You've gotten to this, what I think is really the sweet spot. And I know you didn't cheat off my plan.
No. I can't even understand it. It's in your handwriting. I'd have to pick it up and stare at it.
I think one of the teaching, as and also being an educator, this is the area of the fostering an environment and a mentality to serve musicians, especially young musicians. And I would love to really get into that because I'm lucky enough to have come from a pretty musical family. I have had friends from Freiburg Academy who graduated with scholarships to Berkeley. And one of them, I remember he was working in construction for some time, and the other one, there's one graduate from McGill, is still touring to this day. And, and I remember Ming and this very talented young woman who's now back in her home country in Amsterdam and performing, and then they all share their struggles with me. So I think to myself that there must be a shared voice somewhere, and with your experience, to basically to what you just talked about, that is a struggle.
Well, there's a principle I learned, my interpersonal work in recovery, right? That in order to keep a gift, you got to be willing to give it away. We keep what we have by giving it away. And Art Blakey, one of my great musical mentors, used to say in a more cryptic way, you never see an armored car following a hearse. Meaning, if it's financial riches, no matter how much you gather, you can't take none of it to the graveyard with you. And I think learning through my experience that true riches, that my true wealth is the experience that I have. Good, bad, indifferent. And my willingness to share it with folks who care enough either about what we do in common or how I do it specifically. It's almost an obligation. It's a responsibility from having received a gift in the first place. Because what good is it for me to have learned all that I've learned from Art Blakey as a drummer and being chosen like I was chosen to be, the last guy that this great drumming icon chose to sit on the bandstand and play drums with him. What good is it if I take all of that experience and guard it and protect it until the day I die? I've only saved it a generation at that point. But if I turn and share it with players that are younger than me, then hopefully they'll reach a point where they recognize their responsibility of turning and sharing it with someone younger than them. And so therefore, teaching becomes an awesome responsibility in the preservation of the thing we say we love. Playing music is a way to preserve the music. You make records are documents. They can last as long as, the media that plays them lasts. But when you pass information from generation to generation, that's the living legacy of an art form. Whether it's of any art form, whether it's painting like what your mom does, or martial arts like when we're training Taekwondo, or whether it's music, it's the passing of the information becomes the way we protect what we love. So
what are some of the questions? Now you teach at Berkeley, and I think we all know about Berkeley, right?
Yeah, I teach at Berkeley, but before I came to Berkeley, I taught at Juilliard and Rutgers and Princeton and Long Island University and Manhattan School of Music.
No idea.
Yeah, and those 5 schools I was all teaching at the same time.
Wow.
And when I came to Berkeley, it was an opportunity for me to kind of consolidate my teaching into one full-time commitment in one place, because I was spending more time driving to those places than I was actually teaching when I got there, you know?
Yeah, makes sense. So the students are there for
Yeah.
I'm curious to find out what are some of the most common questions that your students would ask you in related to career. And the reason I think what we just talked about made a lot of sense for me to kind of encapsulate that. And also, I suspect that people who are listening to this podcast, who are as seasoned as you are, experienced as you are, they're also going to be young musicians who are really curious to kind of see ahead of themselves. So what are some of the common questions?
Well, without specifics, most young musicians are more concerned with being as popular as the people that they find most popular. Okay? And part of my job is to snatch the veil of ignorance off of that, so that they realize that first of all, the most popular aren't not even sometimes in the top 3 of who the best really are at what they do.
So true. Across industries.
That the politics of the business and the art of playing music are 2 completely different endeavors. And so once we get that construct separated, then we can begin to attack each appropriately. Because you have a lot of players that come in and only understand, but it's a natural thing for young players to come in and know well the music of the people that are closest to their age.
That's what they know.
That's what they know.
Right.
You know, like a lot of my students know, you know, Robert Glasper and Ambrose Akinmisery and another young player, Walter Smith, and these guys. Now, all of those guys, I know where all of those guys that I just named, I know where all of them studied, and I know who they studied from, right? And so one of the things I try to point out to my students is, when you're checking out a guy, be sure to check out who he checked out. Because the learning thing is just like the teaching thing. You have to go back farther than the immediate. You got to think farther than one generation. So if I want to understand why Ralph Peterson plays drums the way he does, then what you want to do is get inside of Ralph Peterson's head, get him to talk about his experiences, and find out who he listened to.
Listens to this podcast. You'll find all the answers.
Yeah, I mean, I talk all the time about the drummers that influenced me. The famous ones like Philly Joe Jones, who played with Miles Davis, and Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and of course Max Roach and Elvin Jones and Tony Williams. But then I talk about the lesser known drummers like Red Walcott and you know, guys who Al Harewood, guys who are not household names, but are important players in the continuum, that line that we were talking about, that linear positioning of the history of the music. And so once you understand that, then you can you can have a better sense of what the possibilities are going forward. If you don't have an awareness of that, you could bump into some stuff by accident. And you might even become popular. But what I try to prepare students to do is sustain a 30-year career. Right? Because it's easy to make one record. Every musician in their life playing an instrument, if given enough time, money, and studio resources, can make one record. Right? Yep. The next record I put out as a leader will be my 19th as a leader. I've been on over 150 as a sideman. But put out 10 records and have them all keep you current, keep you relevant, you know. The nature of the business is a young person's business. And I don't regret that. I don't resent that at 52. It's a reality. But, you know, never underestimate the treachery of old age. I always tell my students
52
that.
is not old.
Yeah.
Not old. And you're getting into really my follow-up question, which is, what are some of the questions you feel like your students haven't have not asked you enough and you wish they did? In other words, I feel like there is some hidden gem somewhere of counterintuitive perspectives that you could offer to them.
Well, the question that I welcome most and hear least is, what record is that on, and where can I go get it? Followed by the following week of, I got the record, and I'm hearing a lot of it, but this tune, I can't understand what's going on there. And that tune, I'm not quite sure. So the questions are general, but it's kind of a seeking, there's a certain kind of seeking spirit that I look for in a student. Students today have simultaneously the most resources, which is simultaneously their biggest liability.
Yeah, I agree.
In other words, this disc, this WD disc is what, maybe
100 gigabytes, 1,000 gigabytes.
Maybe this is in WD, so this is an older one. So this is maybe 100 gigs, right? And that's about the size of, that's small as a cell phone, right? When I was coming up in college, we used to have to carry LPs around, right? And the advanced technology was cassette tapes. So we didn't have iTunes. We didn't have the internet. And I'm not belly aching. I'm almost grateful because there are people who have heard and who possess more music than I do, right? I'm not a record collector. I'm a student of music. So I may not have all the records, but the records I know better than most people, right? And so I've had this, I have this kind of conversation almost every semester with students who walk around with these terabyte hard drives, 10 terabytes, right? I say, how many tunes you got on that thing? And they say, oh, well, I got, I stick their chest out, I got 80,000 songs on it. I say, oh, yeah? How many solos can you sing? Not play, just sing. From that, and they're like, what do you mean? Why I got to sing the solos? I said, because singing the solos is learning the vocabulary. And why does a drummer have to learn how to sing a saxophone solo? So that he knows how to ornament a saxophone solo, right? If you only think like drummers and you only listen to drummers, then you're only going to sound like a drummer. And I think that one of the reasons I've been able to stay relevant is that I play music on the drums. That what I play, that my approach, my concept towards drumming transcends solely drumming. And that's not an accident. That's something that has developed over time and with intent. And so you have to identify what after you find your bliss, you got to find your gift, whatever it is, and start to build your career on that. And then as times change, you have to learn how to keep it relevant, which is why, we started out talking about the possibility of doing video podcasts or video lessons from this music room, and how excited I am, because that's going to help redefine me as a brand. Onyx Productions, my record label. I have of the 18 records I've done as a leader, 4 have been on my own label, and so I'm constantly expanding and redefining who I am as an artist and as a businessman, in the attempt to stay relevant and stay fresh.
So that concluded part 1 of my interview with Ralph Peterson Jr. In part 2, Ralph helps dissect the record business and how he succeeded by taking an alternative route. The process may seem counterintuitive at first before that you realize the option is actually quite obvious. Ralph also speaks to his addiction and how he freed his mind and body. Ralph has been drug-free for over 19 years. So please make sure that you tune in for part 2, and I want to take this moment and thank you all for supporting my podcast. To listen to more episodes of the Feisworld podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or visit feisworld.com. That is FEISWORLD, where you can find show notes, links, other tools, and resources. You can also follow me on Twitter at Feisworld. Until next time, thanks for listening.